You're listening to episode 69 of the Confident Rider podcast with Jane Pike. Fabulous human, welcome back to my little corner of podcast land. I'm about to introduce you to one of my favourite people, Sarah LeJeune, who is an equine surgeon, a veterinarian and a clinical professor at UC Davis. She's also a member of JoyRide, my online program, which is how we met in the first instance and got to talking about what it is we are discussing today. I want to give you a heads up that over the course of our conversation, we get into some pretty sensitive subjects, including suicide. And while I think this is a really important conversation to have, and also a really important awareness to gain for so many of us about the pressures that those working in the veterinary field are facing, I also want you to use your discernment and perhaps sit this one out if you feel like it might be problematic for you in some way. What's more, if you are finding yourself in the midst of a mental health crisis, or if you're feeling like you could use some help and support, please know that you're not alone. Grab your phone or jump on your computer, do whatever you need to do, look up those hotline numbers for counselling support, reach out to someone because you're really important, you matter, and there is help out there for you. It's just a matter of tapping into it. So I really hope you enjoy this conversation. Sarah and I are wanting to share awareness as to how we can exercise personal responsibility really within veterinary interactions and relationships. And I'll definitely be getting Sarah back for a part 2 of this episode because she has so much knowledge that extends well outside what it is we discussed here today that I'm really keen to discuss with her. I'll leave you with our conversation now. Everyone, I'm so excited because I'm here with one of my favourite people. This is my second attempt at introduction because I got all formal the first time around. Dr. Sarah. Is that how I should refer to you, Sarah?
Yes, 100%.
I do have to mention your fabulousness though, because it's relevant to the discussion, and you'll cringe when I say this, but you're one of my heroes. Like all of this stuff that I've been reading about you and what I know about you is just like, wow, look at this woman go. I know if you could see Sarah's face now looking back at me as I've said that, but it's true. So Sarah is Dr. Sarah LeJeune, and she is a clinical professor at UC Davis, an equine surgeon, the chief of equine integrative sports medicine, all of those things and so much more. Is that right, what I've said there, Sarah, or do I need to be corrected on some of those terms?
Yes, it's correct.
Thank you so much for hanging out with me today.
Of course, the pleasure is mine, Jane.
So
you too are my hero.
It's a mutual crush fest. I'm like, oh, this is so fun. Sarah, my new best friend. So we have been talking, how this conversation came about was Sarah's part of JoyRide, and we had a discussion in there as part of a sharing circle, which is something that we do periodically once a month. Everyone in JoyRide who wants to kind of gets together and talks about the stuff that's on their mind. And it can be anything and everything. And Sarah jumped on and started talking about the state of play in terms of mental health and some of the concerns that she was having and thinking about in terms of mental health of veterinary students, right? And in the veterinary profession. And we talked about that for a while and kind of got into this really fascinating conversation. And then I was like, we need to do this on the podcast, which is exactly what it is we're doing here today. So, Sarah, do you want to speak a little bit to our intention and how we got to this place, and then we can dive in a little bit more to your background and kind of take it from there?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a lack, I think, of awareness in some areas of the fact that, many veterinarians deal with significant stress in their life. Even to take it to a whole other level, the suicide rate in veterinarians is very, very high. Mm-hmm. And that is across the world. So, I'm more familiar with what's going on in the US, but I was looking at, some statistics in Australia and New Zealand and Europe, and it seems to be across the board, whether, and it doesn't matter if you're equine or small animal veterinarian, that, there's a really high level of stress, and which affects well-being, And, I think it's something that I would like to help alleviate however I can. Of course, you can only do one thing at a time, one person at a time. But I think that, Jane and I were talking about the fact that we wanted to bring this awareness to the community of horse owners who maybe not, who don't know this is happening and who may not realize that their veterinarian is struggling with some of the issues that they're being faced with. So that's kind of where it started. And I mean, Jane has so many amazing resources and tools in her toolbox to help alleviate anxiety and et cetera, that I was thinking that, that would be so useful for veterinarians to have access to.
Yeah, absolutely. And as that discussion kind of progressed, I was like, well, like you said, I think it's really important that people come to you in times of crisis a lot. You're dealing with emergency situations where someone in their family, their animal family is obviously suffering or something is up. Not always, but, there are these really high pressure situations which you come into the midst of. And I think that when we're in that place, it's very easy to let go of the understanding that there's more going on for the other person, for the vet, and that from your perspective or from the perspective of the client, that you can load so much onto the caretaker of your horse because you're kind of in that space of things being really emotive and upsetting, and it's very easy to kind of lose sight, I guess, of the nature of the relationship and what you might be inadvertently placing on the other person.
Yeah, and I think that the interesting thing about veterinarians is that they usually are very empathetic. Mm-hmm. So that's why they're drawn to the profession. Mm-hmm. And they want to fix things. And, I think that there is this sense of when you can't really fix the animal, that it's a failure and you take this on as a personal failure. Mm-hmm. And so there's this feeling of never being good enough, mm-hmm. And I mean, that's, one thing, but then the additional thing is that certain clients, and by client, I mean, the animal owner, depending on the relationship that you may have developed with this person, will share a lot of their emotional burden that's associated with whatever they're dealing with their animal, their horse. Mm-hmm. Let's just speak about horses because that's what we're talking mm-hmm. about. And so, the veterinarian a lot of times will take that on. And then this feeling of not being able to fix those issues are an additional burden. So mm-hmm. it just becomes hard, and it's all about, setting boundaries and all of those things. But, veterinarians are not trained in any of those things. I mean, we're trained to look at an animal and to identify, the symptoms and the disease and how to treat that animal. But we're not really well versed in how to deal with this psychological load of what's going on in the family unit, maybe, that, what's going on, oh, now I can't go to this horse show or this clinic and my goals are coming crashing down. And how do I deal with that? Or just the emotional attachment to an animal that may, need to be euthanized. I mean, mm-hmm. it can be pretty heavy. And I don't think that many people realize maybe how heavy that load can be.
Yeah, that's so true. So how did you come to be in the position that you are now? What motivated you to be a vet in the first place?
Oh, the real answer, which is going to sound cheesy, but it's the truth, is I never wanted to do anything else in mm-hmm. my life. I mean, I just... that was what I wanted. And I always wanted to be a horse surgeon or a horse vet. The reason I became a surgeon is that my finger was transected when I was 12 years old. I was running in a field and I stumbled and landed on glass, and my little finger basically got cut off. Wow. And it was just hanging by like a thread and of skin, My dad rushed me to the hospital, and this amazing woman surgeon was able to do microsurgery, and she reconnected my finger and everything, and I have full function of this finger. And it was just so amazing to me that that could be done, that I thought, oh, I want to be doing this for horses. And so I, I'm originally from Belgium, but I moved to the US when I was 9 with my mom, who was a diplomat. And so I had connection in the US, and I did go to vet school in Belgium, but for specialization training, there really was nothing like that in Europe. So I went to the US, and I was accepted at UC Davis for an equine surgery residency. And so I stayed on as faculty there and did emergency surgery for quite a few years. But then, because my background and my real passion is show jumping horses, I really had this desire to help those particular athletes, and not necessarily show jumpers, but I just wanted to get back into the athlete aspect of things. So I I sought out some different training because I was a little frustrated with conventional veterinary medicine. So I went and sought out acupuncture training and chiropractic training and saddle fit and different sports medicine, which I call integrative sports medicine, because it includes, some of these complementary modalities with regular Western medicine. And so I got board certified in sports medicine as well, and then developed this service, which UC Davis has allowed me to kind of develop on my own. And I've created it exactly what I wanted, which, allows me to use all these different tools in my toolbox, kind of like you, Jane. Mm. And so, now here I am. But I'm seeing that there's a really optimize the client veterinarian relationship. And that I think a lot of times clients are unaware of what might be going on in a veterinarian's life, or, how they might be struggling with certain aspects. And I think that if we could bring that awareness, maybe we can make a small difference.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember hearing the statistics a little while back that in terms of like grouping all of the mental health and medical fields together, that vets had the highest suicide rate. Is that right? Is that a correct statistic?
Well, it's there's different studies that look at that, and there's some conflicting, but it's very high.
Yeah.
It's actually one of the highest, believe it or not, are dentists, which is very strange to me. But the second highest is veterinarians, and much higher than you would think, really. When most people think, oh, but you do what you love. You play with animals all day long.
Yeah, right. Yeah. I completely appreciate that. Yeah. So if we start with the veterinary side of things, and your students and colleagues who are out there either learning to be in the field or currently in the field, I guess what we can understand about someone actually even coming into veterinary medicine these days is that the stakes are really high. Like, this is a pretty hard course to get into. You have to be dedicated. You have to be really knowing your stuff and getting the grades and kind of making the cut to be able to get there in the first place. So my intimation of that is that it predisposes, that the actual course of study itself is predisposed to a type of personality that is working very hard, that has very high standards, that potentially is quite hard on themselves. Would that be an accurate representation, do you think, or is that a too vast a generalization?
No, it's absolutely accurate. The at least in the US it's the hardest. These are the hardest schools to get into. So you're getting, high drive individuals, high achieving individuals who have really high expectations of themselves. And now you're facing them, and in addition, we are doing some selection to prioritize people with empathy, because that seems to be important in the field. And so now you have high drive, very empathetic people. And then, when they don't feel like they can make a difference, or, they're dealing with difficult clients who are, maybe not in agreement, or who prefer to refer to Dr. Google for treatment of their animal, than to them who have worked so hard to get their training. That's really hard to stomach,
Yeah. And as well, I think that there's this paradigm shift, I guess, between the old guard and the new. And what I mean by that is the old way of going about things, which is perhaps more of a handover type situation. Previously, I think maybe sort of 30, 40, 50 years ago, if you went to the doctor or if you went to the vet, you sort of handed over your animal, or you were in a position where you gave over the authority to whoever it was that was in charge. And now what I think is that people are a lot more invested. We're a lot more informed, for better or worse, and perhaps misinformed for better or worse. And with the advent of social media as well, I guess that adds a whole nother dynamic where people feel that they want to offer their opinion, that they want to weigh in on this conversation. And to me, that must be, like you've just spoken of, quite frustrating on some levels, or quite complicating on others, where you're trying to, like you say, keep the peace with someone or deal to the concerns that they have whilst also simultaneously doing your job.
No, definitely. And I think, the studies that have been done on veterinarians is that especially the younger female veterinarians are really struggling. When you think about why that might be, a lot of it could have to do with the fact that, it's hard for them to stand their ground with, what they know is true for this animal, as opposed to, older veterinarians who have more experience. They probably are more comfortable standing their ground and saying, no, this is what I know. And here's what I know. Here's what I think. And if somebody comes and says, well, I read this on the internet and this is what should be done, they just kind of brush it off and laugh and off they go. Whereas, younger veterinarians are intimidated by that and, find that difficult to deal with. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't be fishing around for information. I think we all want to, should be getting the best information that's out there. But I guess it should be done in a respectful manner.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I was going to say that's the basis of this too, which is like none of this is being done with ill intention. It's all being done with the best of intentions. And our aim, I guess, is to actually make people more aware, if they're not already, of the nature of the interaction, the nature of the relationship, and to be, like you say, respectful and mindful about how we go about these conversations, and that, understanding that there's a lot that goes into it from both sides.
Absolutely. Because I realize, I'll say my own personal experience, I've actually had very little problems. I think I've been lucky, but I also come from a background where my parents both, we discussed a lot of issues openly. And my dad is an aviator, I call him. So he flies everything that can take off the face of the earth, minus a spaceship. He can't fly that, but he can fly everything, really. Helicopters, single engine, twin engine, gliders, Airbus, 737, DC-10, I'll pass you the details, but he's an instructor on all of those planes as well, and chief pilot. So he's very much a coach, even though in those days you wouldn't have said that. But I think now I do believe that's exactly what he is. So we always talk through a lot of things, in my family, conflicts with people or whatever, openly, and tried to come up with a way to process what was going on and move on. And so I will say that I think I somehow got trained to be able to deal with these things, some of these dilemmas. I feel like I had some tools in my toolbox, to deal with this, but I don't believe this is the case for many people. And so I was lucky, I was able to, I deal with a lot of complicated situations, but I've always felt like I was able to handle it. And my students say that too. And they're sometimes amazed that I'm able to deal with some of these individuals who are very, emotional about the situation and somehow I can talk them off the ledge, But I think that so many veterinarians don't have those tools, and it would be just great if they had them, because the reality is that we don't want to change the paradigm where it gets to be like in human medicine where you only have 10 minutes to talk to your doctor and that's it. You don't have their phone number, you can't text them, you can't email them. It's very sort of technical and there's no emotional investment. I mean, I pride our profession in being emotionally invested, and so and that's what's wonderful about it. I mean, I know all my clients, I know their kids, I've known their horses for years. I mean, it's a great kind of community. But I think that there's really a need to help some of the younger veterinarians develop the tools to set up boundaries, to be able to deal with these difficult situations and to protect themselves,
Yeah, absolutely. We talked about that briefly between us as well, didn't we? How, we're in a similar situation, albeit in a completely different sphere, in that we don't want that emotional receptivity and connection to be changed. It's sort of part of the magic of the relationship and how you create health in lots of ways too, right? Like the holistic nature of the interaction. But at the same time, there has to be, like you said, a boundary or a flexible boundary in place to make sure that you're sustainable in what you're doing and that you're able to keep showing up for the long term, and that the amount of energy that's being taken out isn't disproportionate to the amount that's coming in, because over time, what will happen is you just can't do your job, basically, at the end of the day, and you can't keep showing up for the things that are important. Yeah, I think the nature of this conversation as well, and around boundaries and the likes and interactions, interpersonal relationships, interprofessional relationships, is such a broad-ranging one, because as human beings, in my experience, or certainly, in the sphere that I'm operating in, this is such a pertinent conversation on an individual level, let alone when you have a magnifying glass or a level of emotional intensity added to the situations that you're talking about. And then it becomes like, if you don't have some pretty solidified basic skills around this, I can see how you're stepping into the fire and how difficult that could be as a consequence.
Yeah. And I would say that my goal for today would be, giving the veterinarians tools. I mean, that's a long-term kind of goal, right? That's not going to be something we can like quickly fix. Mm-hmm. But what would be really awesome is if we could just bring some awareness, because I believe people are good. Not everyone, but most people are good. And most people aren't going around trying to be jerks. Mm-hmm. And they really care about their horses. And, they're not trying to piss off their veterinarian. They're just caring, and they want to do what's right and what they think is right and what they feel is right. Yeah. And they're just trying to make sure that's happening. And so I appreciate all that. But I think that if there could be just a little awareness that, maybe just a thank you every once in a while, or, just some level of appreciation, and maybe realizing, oh, okay, well, this veterinarian is really trying to help me. And they're going to, if I load them up with all this emotional stuff, I mean, that's going to be something that they take home, and it will really affect them. I mean, we can't just walk away from stuff like that, Mm-hmm. I mean, some of us have the tools to do that, but others don't. And I think that if people could just realize a little bit that what they're doing has a consequence, and that they should just maybe self-reflect a little bit on their actions and their words. And I always tell my kids, words are like toothpaste. Once you push them out, you can't push them back in, like it's out. I think that there's something to say about that.
Do you think a part of this conversation needs to actually speak directly to veterinarians who might be struggling at the moment and who might mistakenly think that this is something that's exclusive to their situation? Because I know from working with a lot of people around the area of confidence and anxiety, and especially if they're struggling and have kind of internalized different situations as personal weaknesses or flaws in some way, that there is a delusion that comes up in relationship to that tells them that they're the only one that feels this way, that it's a weakness, that somehow they have to find a way to cope, that like I said, this is a personal flaw that they need to move through. So do we need to bust that box a little bit and say, you know what, if you are struggling at the moment, this is not a necessarily unusual situation, and you're definitely not the only one that's feeling the way that you do right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think still mental health is a stigma, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think nobody wants to say, hello, I'm struggling. I mean, I think, and that's, I think, a function of our society, that you don't want to show weakness. But yeah, I mean, I think that's part of the issue as well, is that there's not, and also I think there's a need to develop a sense of community. More of a sense of community, like even within the veterinarians, some of them can be snarly to each other, and it's, and get competitive, because remember, they're high drive individuals. So that means what? That they're also competitive, right?
Yeah.
And so when people are competitive, they're not necessarily very good team players. And so there's a lot of aspects to this, but again, I think it's something I really feel we could chip away at a little bit.
Absolutely.
And it's like the ripple effect. A while ago, there was this thing at my kids' school called Women's in Science. And they wanted women to come and present whatever they were doing. And of course, I came with a horse that I painted. I painted all the organs on the horse. And we were out in front of the school, not in the school, with one of my horses. And I was telling the kids about how, a horse, all about its organs and blah, blah, blah. And my son was like, oh, this is so stupid. This isn't doing anything for women in science. And I was like, are you kidding me? This is totally awesome. Even if just one little girl walks in there and says, man, this is so cool, I want to be a veterinarian. That's great. I've hit one little girl. I've made that one little impact, and that little girl is going to tell her friends, and then that's going to have a ripple effect. And so I believe in the effect of positivity. I mean, at the end of the day, you can sit around and bitch all day long. What's that going to do? Nothing. But if we can make a little tiny change and tweak people's frame of mind, just even a little bit, I think it could be a huge impact.
Yeah, I completely agree. So from the side of the client then, because there's going to be certainly some vets listening to this, but perhaps more so horse lovers, horse owners who naturally at some point along the way are going to be visiting their vet, or perhaps seeing their vet in a variety of different circumstances, some extenuating. And so from your perspective, what is it that we could do to help this situation, to actually be more respectful in the dynamic, to to really, I guess, and like it is about being mindful, and there are some basic courtesies which hopefully we won't have to mention. But what would you like to say to that? Like if we had the microphone right now to sort of speak to people, which we do to an extent, what would you like to say?
Well, I just would like to say that they should appreciate how lucky they are to have a very highly educated person standing in front of them who's devoting their time currently only to their horse to try to find a solution for this horse. And that usually veterinarians are not going, oh my God, I only have 10 minutes, off I go now. They're going to stand there and listen to whatever it is that you have to say, to get the full history, to do a complete exam. I mean, they're going to take their time, to get to the bottom of it, and just to allow them to do what they do, and appreciate the fact that they still have this option to take time, which I don't know how it is in New Zealand, but in America, human medicine is just terrible. You got 5 minutes, basically. Yeah. The doctors, they're like on a time schedule. And in fact, that's creating a big stress on them because they don't like it. But we are the sort of, we're usually not like that, pushed to that same level. And so that we, time is sort of precious, right? And when you have somebody's time, and you need to be able to appreciate that and value that. And I would just try to let people do their job. So the veterinarian, you called them out to help you with this problem. Let them do their job. Try not to argue so much. Or, I mean, if you have questions, that's great. But some people get into complete argument, and it's exhausting. It's exhausting to try to defend what it is that you want to say. Now, there are usually more than one treatment option available. Absolutely. And so it's up to the veterinarian to give multiple options. But getting into a full-on argument about what's right and what's wrong and what shouldn't be done, and I mean, is not appropriate, I think. And so I would just say, self-reflect a little bit about the interactions you've had and think about, is there something that could have been maybe approached with a little bit more kindness, and also just thank you, saying the word thank you. Most veterinarians are not in the profession to make money. I mean, they did go into it. I mean, we all need to make money, obviously, but we're not in it to make money. If we were in it to make money, we'd be doing something else. Trust me. And so, you've got somebody's attention right now who has your animal's best interest at heart. Truly, most of us are like that. And I would say, that's really special, and that should be valued somehow. And I'm not saying roll out the red carpet when the veterinarian shows up, but somehow there needs to be a little bit of appreciation, that goes back into this relationship,
What I take from that as well, from the client or owner perspective too, is to recognize what is outside the limits of the vet to hold for you. And I'm talking about, when I'm saying holding, I mean like perhaps your anxiety or your concerns, or, your secondary worries that might relate to the situation, with the knowledge that it's not that they're not compassionate or perhaps not willing to hear those things, but if you actually want the best outcome for your horse, the best thing to do is to simplify the situation for the vet so they can do their job to the best of their ability, and to perhaps find other sources of support to hold you in that space so that you're not loading unnecessarily onto someone who's already got a very high pressure situation to deal with potentially anyway.
Yeah, exactly.
Because the empathy piece is really interesting when you said that. I mean, naturally, people coming into this, for the most part, that's going to be part of their, a big part of their makeup regardless. But the fact that it's being prioritized as part of the kind of induction process, if you like, or selection process for veterinary medicine. And then when we think about, okay, so if we're actually considering aspects of someone's nature or tendencies to lean in a specific direction, and then the actual material that they're being talked through, doesn't include how to support that within yourself as well. So meaning like the veterinary degrees and qualifications themselves are obviously, and for very good reason, obvious reason, heavily loaded in terms of medical care and instruction. However, this relationship dynamic piece is actually a huge part of the equation, and something that's not really given much attention or paid much attention to during the educational process.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, I've been in getting prepared for this podcast, because I did need to make sure that this wasn't just like a US problem, that it was elsewhere, but it is really kind of a global issue with veterinarians. And I'm going to try to see if we can incorporate in some of the veterinary training some piece of this, how to deal with this, like you said, the relationship piece. I mean, that is a huge part of developing a clientele, is having these relations with other people. And then particularly, that conflict piece, because obviously if it were so easy that you went and said, you showed up with your horse, I told you, this is what's wrong. You said, great. What do we do about it? I tell you what to do. You do it. That's it. That'd be a piece of cake. But that's not usually how it goes. Number one, the veterinary piece is not that easy because you're dealing with a nonverbal animal, a flight animal, so their mission is life is to fake it. Okay. No, do not show weakness. So, identifying issues, especially if they're subtle, is not always that hard. I mean, it's not always that easy. So there's a little bit of obviously, skill involved, and so some younger veterinarians may be intimidated with certain situations they're presented with. Certain cases might be well over their head, and so they should be comfortable enough to seek out other veterinarians for help, and also feel not, how should I say this? In front of the client, they don't want to feel like, oh my gosh, now I'm going to show weakness. I'm going to admit that I don't know what I'm doing here. And so I'm going to refer the case. But that's not how it should be viewed. That should be viewed as great, this person is trying to help me. This person doesn't have the tools to help me with this animal, but this person has the humility to recognize I don't have these tools, and I'm going to find the person with those tools. So that is actually a great thing. But because there's this pressure put on people, the veterinarian, to fix every problem, then that gets lost a little bit. And so I think that there's a lot of things that I think we can do to help. I think just one little thing at a time, but I guess I went all over the place. But my point is, I think there's lots of different facets to the problem. And one of them, I guess, is also that there's so many things that you're having to treat that, veterinarians should feel comfortable to say, you know what, this is not in my wheelhouse. Like, I need to refer this case. And that shouldn't be viewed as, oh my God, my veterinarian's terrible and didn't know how to deal with that problem. That should be be okay. It shouldn't be viewed as a weakness.
Yeah. I think that this is really important to consider, and you're certainly not all over the place, which is the conversations that I'm having, or be it with people to people directly. We can't discount the social, communal, structural atmosphere or components as part of the conversation. And I think that, yes, we need to do work on individual levels to help us, be more resilient and be more robust in terms of our capacity to deal with things that are uncomfortable or difficult. But at the same time, it's not just an individual discussion. It is a broader social discussion. It's a bigger community discussion. And in some instances, it's a structural discussion, within veterinary faculties or veterinary educational facilities as well, like you've alluded to, that actually is like, if this is happening for more than one person, if this isn't just a scattering or a handful of people, then we need to recognize that there's also broader systems at play that are feeding into why people feel this way. And so it is so multi-leveled, and I guess it would be easy to get overwhelmed with the potential for change in different areas. But at the same time, to recognize you can be incredibly powerful in very small ways that create quite huge and dynamic changes to the broader industry as a whole. So I love that we're having this conversation. It's really cool.
I really hope, and I don't want people to think, listeners to think, oh my gosh, there's this perception that I think that horse owners are not appreciative. I would say that most are. Most are. And I personally have only met one or two people over my career now of over 20 years that I thought, boy, this is not a good match. I mean, this isn't going to work. Somebody has to be driving the bus. And guess what? It's me. So if you don't like it, you need another veterinarian, because I'm not going to sit here and argue with you about Dr. Google and who knows what. I don't have time for that. But I mean, I'm in a position where I can do that, and I walk away from that, and I worry about it a little bit, but it doesn't haunt me too much, because I have a lot of positive interactions, with my clients. But I do worry about younger veterinarians who come out, and, horse owners can be very difficult, because I think the dynamic with the horse is so hard. One, there's the emotional connection, of course, But then two, there's this, this is your hobby, it's your passion, it's your goal, you have these, it's your sport, you have all this, what am I trying to say?
Investment.
Competitive sort of nature with it. So there's a lot of emotion involved in some of these horses. And so it can be very tough for a young veterinarian to walk into that. And I think that, probably from the veterinary side, we need to be mentoring these veterinarians more closely, and making sure that we're not just sending them out into those situations, because it can be tricky. And again, I don't think that the horse owners are necessarily trying, they're not trying to be mean or insensitive or belligerent or whatever. I think they're just so emotional about the situation and they want this problem fixed, that it just adds a lot of energy to the situation, which is hard to handle. And then the young veterinarians walk away from that saying, I don't want to do equine. I mean, we have so many people don't want to do equine anymore. The hours are long, people don't pay well, and the clients are tough. So that's going to be a problem. If we can't recruit equine veterinarians, what's going to happen to the horses, right?
Yeah. I read the Merck study that you sent me on the mental health sort of analysis of veterinarians, and some of the statistics made me feel really sad. Well, a lot of the statistics made me feel sad, and one of them was that 57% of current vets wouldn't recommend the career as a profession. And I thought, coming into it, this is a field of people that would have been motivated by passion and love in the first instance. Like you say, it wouldn't have been about money. It would have been about, like, this is something that I'm really interested in because I have this connection to animals or horses or so on and so forth. And then to get to the stage where, almost 3/4 of them, or well over half at least, would tell people to think again, is kind of a little bit sad to my mind.
Yeah, it's very sad. And the other sad thing is that we were talking about the suicide thing. 25% of veterinarians have thought about suicide. And by thinking about suicide doesn't mean that's like, oh, maybe I'll kill myself, kind of like that. But they've thought actually about how to do it. And that's really scary, because we do have access to the drugs, and I will tell you, I unfortunately have had one student that I knew very closely who, she graduated and she was in practice a couple years, but, committed suicide. And I would have never guessed. This girl was so bubbly and outgoing. And you would have never guessed. But then those are the people, who are a little bit idealistic like that, who probably fall very low, it just is very, very sad. And I hope that, that we can chip away at it, a little bit. And there's different resources out there, for veterinarians. There's some different groups, that are sort of support groups. But I do think that some of these resources are not very user friendly, and they're just not that helpful. It's really kind of dry.
Huh? It just popped into my head as you were saying that if anyone listening is in that position as well, as of feeling pretty down and out, that please to reach out to someone, because it's that you're very valued and we want you around. So it's important to kind of connect with the people that can help you. And I will link in the show notes to some places to help you get some help.
Yeah. And this brings me to why I was drawn to you, Jane. Not so much because I have issues necessarily in my profession, but, because there is a need, I think, for support on how to deal with certain emotions that you might be feeling for whatever reasons, and it's just not something that is that accessible and that helpful. And I kind of came across you by chance. And I was following Warwick Schiller a little bit, but then he had mentioned your name. So I thought, I'll check that out. And I was like, wow, this woman, she is, what I love about you is that there's the way you can articulate some of these things, and then you bring the body piece into it, has been incredibly useful. And that's why I was thinking that, and I'm so thrilled to be here with you today and humbled and all of that. But I'm really thinking that you could be so useful to us, as a profession with what you do. Because I think that just telling somebody, relax, go meditate, or, stay off social media, that's bad. Take the time to spend with your family. Well, when you're feeling really deep down and depressed, you're not going to do those things. You don't even have the energy to do any of that, so you have to start real slow.
Yeah.
And I think that, that's the part that is missing a little bit, is how do you do that,
Yeah. And I think that just from a personal perspective, outside of the horse world, without getting too far into it, just to respect people's privacy, but there's been 2 or 3 instances in my life where people very close to me have been in very dark situations mentally. And when you're in that place, like you say, like I've stayed for a number of weeks with someone in a mental health facility that was really struggling at that point. I know personally in my family, there's been people that have really struggled with this as well for different reasons. And there's a lot of the inspirational quotes will only get you so far, and the kind of glib it's all very well intentioned, I understand, but when you're really in that place, it's a tough one to get out of. Like, it's to actually like mobilize something when you feel that dark, to find that sense of kind of agency within you when it feels like all the lights have gone out, is a really serious thing. And it's really close to my heart. So I don't underestimate the intensity of feeling that happens when people are in those spaces. And also the what's the word that I'm looking for? How we convince ourselves that everything that we're believing that isn't working, and the negativity that can swirl around our brain space, how pervasive and how seductive that is. But with some perspective and with some time, you recognize, perhaps that's the joy of looking back, retrospectively with people who've come through these situations, just how sucked in you get, to believing your own stuff and to the power of those feelings. And so it is, I've kind of gone off on a different tangent. I'm not quite sure where I'm heading with it, but I guess I say I have total empathy for what it is that you're talking about. And even when I juxtapose that, like we've had a couple of horses put to sleep, and that is a being leaving the world in that way is a huge energy. Like there's something incredible that happens in that moment, like where there's a tangible, palpable energy loss. And I've only experienced that once or twice in my life up until this point, having been like, on site with it. And I often have thought of vets in the situation where this is a not so unusual part of their day. And that has to go somewhere, and if you don't have the energy you don't have the skills rather to deal with these big events, and then coupled on that, the emotional intensity of someone else going through that, it's huge. It's big stuff, really big stuff.
Yeah, it is huge. And I'll tell you, so, doing emergency surgery for like 15 years, and, that means a lot of colics and things like that. And you can save a lot of them, but obviously you can't, there's a lot you can't save. And I will say, I miss doing the surgeries, but I don't miss all of that death. Dealing with a lot of death is hard. I love horses. That's why I do this, is I love them. And so, and I, obviously putting them down at times is what needs to happen. It's the right thing to do, of course. Absolutely. But is it hard? Absolutely. And I don't think there's any veterinarian who would ever tell you that it's easy to put an animal down. It's not. And when you are having to deal with this on a day-to-day basis, it's no cakewalk, Yeah. And now what I do is easy in comparison, because I don't, I deal with horses that are lame or that have back pain or that have performance problems. And that's hard because people are, frustrated with the situation, but the horse isn't dying.
My gratitude and admiration really for all vets out there. I've been in situations with my horse, not so, relatively recently as well, which was pretty life and death. And I'm so grateful that there are people out there like you that have the capacity and the skills to be able to help. So anything we can do from our side to help lighten the load and to help make things more easeful in a situation that might not be inherently easeful is something that I'm certainly more than happy to do, and hope that I'm sure others are the same, because like you say, we're all on the same team essentially. And this is, I guess, where we have to get to with this, is that within these interactions, the majority of the time the intention is so good from both sides, and if we can just unify in a collaborative way in support of that and recognize the stresses that are occurring on both sides. So yes, as a client, there are absolutely stresses that come with your beloved horse being unwell or out of action, and we just have to consider where we're getting the support for those, and if we're reaching out to people and places that perhaps aren't equipped, or overloading them with situations that are unfair essentially for their pay grade.
Yeah,
absolutely. So where do you think we can head with this? Like I want to, we've gone to some sort of heavy places in this conversation, which is absolutely necessary, I think, and I probably got on a little tangent of my own there for a minute. I'd like to sort of to turn it up again, to kind of turn the direction in a slightly different way, and think about what is it that we can do to actually help this situation. We've talked about it from a client perspective. From the veterinary perspective, we've had conversations as well about looking to create potentially between us some kind of training or something that can assist with these understandings and very practical skills for how do you deal with these types of interactions when things go pear-shaped, or you're feeling overwhelmed or anxious, or your boundaries seem to be non-existent. What would you like to see happen? I know we've alluded to a few things, but is there anything else that's popping into your brain space that seems worthy of mention right now?
Well, I think it would be cool, and all of those things are great, but I think it would be really great to have like a think tank or a roundtable discussion or something, because I'm only one person and you're only one person. And though we're totally amazing, particularly you, I
got in there,
that,
Sarah. I would have twisted that one round.
Yeah, well, I said it first.
So funny.
I think others may have really valuable input as well. I think it would be cool to get a horse trainer, a physio, a veterinary technician, different people from different aspects, and start talking about this and get sort of their input and their viewpoint, and see where that goes. I think that would be really interesting.
Yeah, I agree. And like you say, the community aspect is so necessary and so needed, and that making some bridges or creating some links between the different aspects of professions that are united by this same common interest would be amazing. I'd be so into that. And if anyone listening would be into that, please let us know. Because that's definitely something we could look to facilitate and kind of get moving with. For one, I definitely don't like to leave it as a conversation. It's like, how can we create some tangible change in this area, because it's important, and even having conversations with trainers, horse trainers specifically, I know that there probably isn't one that I've spoken to that don't say that the most difficult part of their job is the human-to-human interaction. That if they were just left to train the horse or to work with the horse, that's the easy part. That it's the dealing with the humans that's the difficult part. So,
and I would say the same of my job.
Mm-hmm.
Dealing with the horses is the easy part. But no, I think getting people talking, bringing this awareness, I think a lot of people don't know that this is going on. I really don't. I think that people don't realize that. When I talk to my clients about this, they just can't believe it. They go, I don't believe, it's not that they don't believe me, but they can't really comprehend how this profession has so much stress. And it does, and it's just a function of, I think, getting somebody with high drive who wants to fix things and who's empathetic. And then you can't fix everything, right? You just can't. And so that feeling of, I'm not good enough. And then you add to that other things. But I mean, that's really, I think, the key point. But if people would just realize that a little bit, maybe they would change how they approach it. Because again, I think most people are not trying to walk through life being jerks. I mean, they want to be good. They just maybe don't realize what they're doing is having a negative effect,
Yeah, I agree. I believe in our fundamental goodness, our basic goodness, as it's posited. I think that's the underlying thread which unites it all. And it's definitely, I'm hopeful that just this conversation, and we're going to have more, because I have other things I want to pick your brains on that don't relate specifically to what we're talking about now, but to the sports medicine side of things. So you'll be hauled back sooner rather than later, hopefully, for a part 2 of this conversation. But definitely I'm hopeful that if nothing else, we've kind of sparked that, like, maybe I could do something differently, or maybe just me not doing something or behaving in a slightly different way would actually make a really big difference to the life of the professional that I'm engaged with, specifically our vets in this situation. So thank you so much, Sarah.
Oh, no, thank you. I've just been so thrilled to be here and honored. I mean, like I said, my son is going to be scrutinizing this podcast very carefully, wondering what my contributions have been and are they up to par.
Maybe we should get him and Flynn on the next podcast and they can talk about what it's like to have a mother's in this space.
I think so.
We're coming for you. Oh, it's so wonderful. And I will extend so much gratitude and thanks on behalf of all of us horse owners for your amazing work and contributions to the field, and those of your colleagues and students. We are absolutely behind you and so appreciative of everything. And I know that, we'd be lost without you. So thank you for everything that you do.
Oh, no, thank you. Thank you for letting us work on your beautiful horses. We love them.
And we'll put something together. I'll have a think about how to potentially create some kind of form, or like if you're interested in being part of this discussion and you're a veterinary professional or an equestrian professional that would be keen to participate in some kind of roundtable discussion on this, then you can flick me an email, jane@confidentwriter.online, and I'll me and Sarah will put our heads together and think about what it is that we can make happen. But thank you so much, Sarah.
Thank you, Jane. Take care.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Thanks so much for tuning in today. I really appreciate you being part of this conversation. If you're interested in being involved in discussions and building a support community, as Sarah and I have mentioned, then please get in touch. You can email me, jane@confidentwriter.online, and Sarah and I will be talking further about possibilities and collaborations for the future, so it would be really great to hear from you. Have a fabulous rest of your day, and as per usual, I will catch you in the next episode.